All right, so today we're diving deep right into the book of Genesis. We're going to be looking at Jacob and kind of a turning point in his life and his family's life. And I think even if you think, oh yeah, I know the story of Jacob, I think you're going to find some surprises here.
Yeah, one of the things that's so interesting about this text is that it's not just like a story, It's like a spiritual roadmap. There are so many insights about faith, about family, about what it means to change, to transform.
I like that, a spiritual roadmap. Okay, so we're picking up with Jacob and his family. They're heading to Bethel, which we know is already a significant place for him. But before they even get there, he gives this really specific instruction to his family, almost like a spiritual house cleaning. Like, what's the meaning behind that? What's going on there?
Well, he tells them, right, to get rid of their foreign gods. And we have to remember this is a time when idolatry was just everywhere. It was like part of the culture. So for Jacob to say, nope, we're not doing that, it's like this really powerful statement.
Yeah, it's huge. Like, it makes me think about spring cleaning or something. You're getting rid of all the stuff you don't need anymore, making a fresh start.
Right. Exactly. It's like hitting the reset button on their spiritual lives. Like he's saying, we're going back to the source, back to the foundation of our faith, and we can't bring all this other baggage with us.
Okay, I love that. But here's where I get tripped up a little bit, because they don't just get rid of the idols, they bury them under a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the significance of that detail?
It's curious, isn't it? And it's not just any tree, it's a terebinth tree. And those were really significant in the ancient Near East.
Oh, really? How so?
Yeah, they were often associated with sacred spaces, places where heaven and earth kind of met.
Wow, okay. So it's almost like they're burying a part of their past, but they're doing it in this really respectful way, like acknowledging it, letting it go.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just erasing the past, but it's transforming their relationship to it. And then what happens next is really interesting, because as Jacob and his family are traveling, the text says that the terror of God fell upon the cities around them.
Yeah, that line always makes me think, like, okay, something big is about to happen. What do you think is going on there?
Well, it's one of those phrases that's open to interpretation, but many scholars see it as this kind of protective shield, like God's way of ensuring their safety on this journey.
A protective shield. I like that. So they're being watched over, even when it seems like they're surrounded by potential danger. And me, I'm always drawn to the moments of change, the transformations in these stories. We're about to hit a big one here, because when Jacob arrives at Bethel, he doesn't stay Jacob for long.
Right. That's where we get that incredible name change from Jacob to Israel. And that's a moment that just echoes throughout history.
Okay, so let's unpack that, because it feels massive. It's not just like, oh, hey, I'm going to call you this now. God steps in and says, you are now, and gives him this whole new identity. What's the deeper significance there?
It really is more than just a name change, isn't it? It's this total identity shift. It's like, imagine if your name carried the weight of your whole life's purpose, Like,
Right.
That's how important names were in ancient Hebrew culture.
Okay, so when we hear those two names, Jacob versus Israel, what are we supposed to understand about those identities? Like, how different are we talking?
Well, let's start with Jacob, right? The name he's had his whole life. It literally means he grasps the heel.
He grasps the heel.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that takes us right back to the beginning, to his birth, that rivalry with his twin brother Esau.
Exactly. And it really speaks to his character, right? Like his cunning, his ambition, even that tendency to bend the rules a little bit.
Yeah, he's always scheming, trying to come out on top.
Right. But then you have Israel, which means he strives with God. And that suggests someone who's been through the ringer, who's wrestled with the divine and come out changed.
So from heel grabber to wrestler with God, that is quite the upgrade.
It really is. It's like God's looking at Jacob with all his flaws, all his struggles, and saying, I see your potential.
I love that. But, what I find interesting is that right after this name change, God reiterates the covenant promise, the land, the descendants, becoming a great nation. But we've heard this before, right? So why do you think it matters so much that it's repeated here?
You're right. This isn't the first time God's made this promise. But let's not forget, Jacob's journey has been, well, let's just say it's been eventful.
He hasn't always made the best choices.
To put it mildly, he's made mistakes, he's tested boundaries, but God's commitment to him, that hasn't changed.
So it's like this incredible reassurance, right? It's like God saying, look, I'm in your corner no matter what. This promise, it's not based on your ability to be perfect, but on my faithfulness.
Exactly. It's a message for Jacob in that moment, but honestly, I think it speaks to all of us. Like, How many times have we doubted? How many times have we messed up and thought, that's it, I've blown it?
Right. Like, God can't possibly still be there for me after that.
But this story reminds us that God sees our potential even when we don't, and that he's not giving up on us.
It's like this incredible message of hope, of second chances. It's almost like this renaming, this reaffirmation of the promise. It's preparing us for what's to come. And I think it's safe to say things are about to get, well, complicated.
That's one way to put it, because woven into the story of transformation of these incredible promises, there's also this deep, deep sorrow. And that brings us to the story of Rachel.
So we lift off with this beautiful moment, Jacob's transformation, that renewed covenant with God, so much hope for the future. But then, like you said, things shift. And Rachel's story, it's just one of those parts of the Bible that always hits me right in the feels.
It's true. It's such a powerful contrast, isn't it? You have this incredible high, this promise from God, and then immediately after, this really deep sorrow, Rachel dying in childbirth. And it reminds us that even in the midst of these big stories, these huge moments of faith, life is complicated.
It really is. It's like just when you think you've got things figured out, life throws you a curveball.
Yeah.
And the details in this passage, they just get me every time. Like the difficult labor, Rachel naming her son as she's dying, Jacob's grief, it's also raw, so real.
Yeah. It's incredibly human, isn't it? Even in the midst of these larger-than-life figures, we see those universal experiences of joy and sorrow, love and loss. And sometimes those really intense moments, they give birth to something new, something powerful. Like with Rachel, even as she's facing death, she's giving life and leaving a legacy.
And the names she gives her son, Benoni, son of my sorrow, you can just hear the heartbreak in that name.
Absolutely. It's like the weight of her imminent death is right there in that name.
And then, Jacob, in his grief, he renames him Benjamin, son of my right hand, which almost feels defiant, like he's refusing to let sorrow have the final word.
Right. And the right hand, that symbolizes strength, authority, blessing. So by giving him that name, it's like Jacob's choosing to focus on hope, on the future that Benjamin represents.
Yeah, it's like this subtle but powerful shift. It's that reminder that we have a choice, even in the midst of grief, and that choosing hope, choosing to look beyond the pain, that can be an act of faith in itself.
Beautifully said. And then, right after this incredibly emotional scene, the text does this interesting thing. It shifts gears completely and gives us this list of all of Jacob's sons. It's almost like a genealogy.
Yeah, it always feels a little jarring to me after such a heavy moment. What's going on there, do you think?
Well, I think it's easy for us as modern readers to kind of gloss over those genealogical lists in the Bible, but we have to remember storytelling worked differently back then. And these lists, they weren't just about keeping track of who was who, they were about legacy.
Ah, okay. So it's like we're zooming out from this one family story, as powerful as it is, to this much wider lens, right? This is the foundation of a nation.
Exactly. And it goes back to that covenant promise. Each son represents a future tribe of Israel. So it's a reminder that God's plan, it extends far beyond just one generation. It's this ongoing story that unfolds over centuries.
I love that. And it makes me think about how our own stories, even those moments that feel small, they become part of something so much bigger, something that echoes through generations. And speaking of echoes, we can't wrap up this deep dive without talking about Isaac's death, which happens in this passage as well. It's interesting, compared to the raw emotion of Rachel's death, Isaac's passing is almost a footnote.
It's true. But, even in its brevity, it speaks volumes, especially the phrase that's used, gathered to his people. That phrase in the ancient Near Eastern context, it's incredibly significant.
Really? What's the deeper meaning there?
It conveys this beautiful sense of peace, of continuity. Like, it's not just about the end of a life, but a return, a homecoming, joining your ancestors in the afterlife, becoming part of something larger than yourself.
So it's almost like even in death, there's this sense of belonging, of being part of a story that transcends our individual lives.
It does, doesn't it? And as we wrap up our deep dive into this chapter of Jacob's life, this incredible tapestry of faith and loss and legacy, I think that's something worth holding on to. The idea that even in the midst of change, of grief, of uncertainty, we're part of something bigger than ourselves. A story that continues to unfold generation after generation.
Such a powerful thought. And I think that's a great place to leave it for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for spending this time with us. Toby, Eleanor, and our team of researchers are working hard to produce more episodes. If you value what we're doing here, please consider subscribing and sharing the word. Additionally, our podcast, RSS, and Patreon links can be found below. Listener support is what makes our work possible. Join us next time for another deep dive. God bless.